Evet, Şam geldi mi? Hi, Sean.
Hi, how are you?
Fine. How are you doing, my friend?
Well enough. You're looking a little shaggy.
Ah, I wasn't. I went to school today,
Okay.
so I had to start it a little bit 5 minutes late. I'm so sorry because when I was running back to home, that was my best, but still 5 minutes late, brother.
No worries.
Okay, distinguished friends. Now I'm going to introduce you such a great gentleman who is a longtime friend of mine. I don't know how many years we had been working together. He's working in several administrative positions in Bahçeşehir University, but more than everything, he is a doctor of political science. He had his entire education in United States. Then we bring him to Bahçeşehir University, and he has been with us for how many years, Sean?
11 years.
11 already? My
But
God, 11 years. Sean Cox, Dr. Sean Cox, has been teaching in Bahçeşehir University's Global Affairs programs, international relations programs, and he has been teaching, especially in Russia, about Caucasian area, Eurasian politics, etc. So now, because I started late, we are a long time friend. I'm not going to just go ahead and talk about him. Everybody knows Sean. So I'll immediately kick off with my questions because we have 40 minutes and I want to use it as, full as possible in my best capacity. Sean, my first question, dear friend. Russia. We have been talking about United States, Europe, even the Middle Eastern countries, Iran, and a lot of China, definitely. But when we come to Russia, it's kind of a silent politics going on lately. So, can you tell us a little bit? Okay,
Russia?
Sean, are you connected via Wi-Fi or 3G?
4G.
Okay, maybe do you think you can change your spot a little bit because it keeps on cutting off?
All good from my end.
Yep, a lot better, a lot better. I don't know what you did, but it's a lot better now.
Magic.
So, but now the sound is gone.
Can you not hear
Can
me?
you talk?
I'm talking just fine. No? I'm all up and everything. How about I exit and I'll come back?
Let's do that. Let's do that, and then we start. That's gonna be safer. Şan'ın sesiyle ağız hareketleri arasında bir senkron bozukluğu var. Onu da tamamladık mı rahat rahat soracağım. Okay. Now I hope everything is gonna be better. Can you tell us in the post-pandemic process, during the pandemic process, and right prior to the pandemic process, can you tell us a little bit about Russian politics and how it is going to be shaped, especially after this current situation, my friend?
Well, there are several different strands. There are several into consideration. If we before the pandemic, of course, we have Russia dealing with the price of oil in general, and frankly, a very ill-timed oil war with Saudi Arabia just before this whole pandemic blew up. So Russia was starting to experience economic development.
Sean, do you have an A plug or kind of
Headphones?
yeah, earphone, headphone, plug, anything?
All right.
Because the sound keeps on cutting down.
All right. Let me. I'll right back. Okay.
Okay. Benim değerli HLO ekibim, özellikle bunu hatırlatmanızı rica ediyorum her konuşmacımıza. Hatırlatmıyor musunuz arkadaşlar? Kulaklık işine.
All right. This will be. How about now?
Sean, perfect. Let's not touch anything. Sound, picture, and everything is great. Let's go with Russia.
It's going to be a little bit shakier because I have to hold it in my hand now. So,
Let's go.
in any case, what I was talking about was that just prior to the pandemic blowing up in our faces, the Russian economy was taking a hit because of an ill-timed oil war with Saudi Arabia that had just been launched. In addition, Russia was facing additional sanctions from the United States and from some European Union countries regarding their involvement in trying to influence the internal politics of these countries, particularly for the United States. The elections, as much as Donald Trump denied any involvement, there was in fact evidence that this was happening. So Russia was facing external sanctions. It was facing a decrease in its major revenue generator. It was engaged in an oil war with Saudi Arabia, and then we hit the pandemic. So the pandemic sort of isolated everyone, as you know, for quite some while. One of the traditional ways that Russia helps deflect from internal problems is engaging externally, like most countries do, but Russia's a bit more surreptitious about it. They're a bit more hidden and secretive about it. And Russia and Putin and his army of hackers and all of the people that work for him that help try to sow mistrust throughout the world and to plant false information and fake news of the United States and all of this. But then when the pandemic hit, suddenly they needed to be focused domestically. And all of this mighty media control and all of this information peddling machinery that Putin has spent years building up was now focused inwards to help try and control the messaging, to help reframe the issue within Russia that the pandemic wasn't a problem for Russia. And in fact, that seemed to be the case for many, many weeks. We didn't hear anything about there being a problem with coronavirus or anything like that within Russia. But then suddenly and quite rapidly it blew up, and it was too difficult to hide even from a very friendly pro-Putin press or Putin-controlled press. And you have people dying by the thousands. You have the spread of the virus by hundreds of thousands. You have the continued impact of the economic sanctions. You have the continued impact of the decline in the oil. Is experiencing his worst popularity ever since he was appointed president by Boris Yeltsin in 1999. His opinion and public opinion in Russia has declined dramatically, and given his control of the system, this is very surprising. So what does that mean in a post-pandemic period? Honestly, it's hard to say because everyone assumes that Putin has something up his sleeve to try and extend his governance of the Russian Federation, but no one quite knows what it is because he's manipulated the constitution, he's made changes, he's hopped from president. What the road forward is for Putin to maintain control. Everyone just assumes he's going to figure it out somehow. For Russia overall, they're going to be entering a very, very difficult period because it's going to take a while for oil and natural gas as commodities to increase in their value enough for the last 20 years.
Now, what I'm trying to do today is with you, from the center, by putting Russia to the center, I'm going to ask you different lines and different questions.
Okay.
But mainly the center is going to be Russia.
Okay.
So, not long questions. Energy.
Well, energy is very interesting because, as I said, Russia is having difficulty with it with the declining in the recent future, particularly as it pertains to events that are going on in the Caucasus and events that are going on in Ukraine. As you know, and I'm sure as your audience knows, we have the near completion of the Turk Stream pipeline and we have the Nord Stream 2 pipeline. And both of these are designed, at least from the Russian perspective, to make Europe, and in particular Central and Eastern Europe, more dependent on Russia by bypassing Ukraine. So it weakens Ukraine vis-a-vis Russia. It weakens Eastern and Central Europe vis-a-vis Russia, giving them the better ability to assert political influence domestically in these countries. And also because of sanctions against Iran, because of conflict between Iran and Saudi Arabia, everything that's going on in the Middle East, because of hopefully increased demand as we roll out of the pandemic, Russia's trying to position itself right now as the energy leader of the world. It wants to supplant the United States. It wants to supplant Saudi Arabia and other OPEC countries as the most reliable provider of energy. So what it's looking to do is in its immediate neighborhood is trying to dominate the political dialogue there so that it can influence players in the energy sector.
Europe and Russia.
Europe and Russia. Well, if we're looking at
it from this question style, Europe and Russia. I'm gonna do this today. Okay, Europe and Russia.
Europe and Russia. Well, if we're talking in the sense of the European Union, ever since the Russian annexation of Crimea and their illicit support for the rebel movement in the Donbass in eastern Ukraine, relations between the European Union and Russia have been somewhat static. They haven't really developed. They've been somewhat frozen. There's been a small mixture of sanctions introduced by the European Union against Russia because of their activities in Crimea and in eastern Ukraine. If you think about Russia as a wolf and the European Union as a collection of sheep, Russia as the wolf is trying to grab some of the sheep away from the herd, like Hungary, Bulgaria, Romania. They're trying to create cracks in the facade of the European Union so that Russia can have greater control and influence in its traditional sphere of influence, the former communist states of Eastern Europe and Southeastern Europe. Wait a second, sorry, I was just taking a breath there. If we're talking about individual countries,
no time for breath. You have to talk. Don't ever think about stopping, Sean.
If we're talking about individual countries, Russia, especially Putin, are especially focusing on trying to reassert their authority under their former Soviet states that they had there, Hungary, Romania, Bulgaria. They're trying to gain influence with the populist and nationalist parties in other countries that we see on the rise, in Austria, in Germany, in Poland as well. For many years, the issues regarding Latvia, Lithuania, and Macedonia were off the table because they had been so tightly embraced by Europe, by the European Union, by NATO. But even now, we can see Russia making efforts to sort of chip away at right now.
Now, Ukraine, US, Ukraine, Russia. Due to Ukraine, Russia, and US.
That one's a little bit more complicated, especially with with Donald Trump's whole impeachment proceedings and the way that Zelensky in Ukraine was perceived to be seeking favors from Trump to support their position against Russia and to add pressure on Russia, but Russia's involvement in the election. Honestly, it's a very deep and tangled web between Russia, the United States, and Ukraine. Basically, dynamic of Ukraine and Russia, because he doesn't want to stick issues instead of trying to get American citizens' minds off of what was going on there. But honestly, I don't think anyone in the U.S. administration has any idea how to offer assistance or to compel certain types of behavior. Is going to keep dominating that dialogue and trying to pressure Ukraine to give in to its interests.
Russia, Syria, Russia, Assad, Turkey, Syria, Turkey, Assad, Turkey, Russia over Idlib, Syria, and Assad.
Well, Russia's involvement in the Middle East, Russia's involvement in Syria, is Russia's attempt to reestablish itself in a global context. Powers to a unipolar system with only one superpower, and Russia spent a decade under Boris Yeltsin being the poor man of Europe, visiting all of the countries with hat in hand, looking for money, for assistance, for development. This is part of what led to Putin's rise to power. Putin's ability to consolidate power is to feed off the angst and the anger of the Russian population, that they used to be one of the most powerful countries in the world. Now everyone looked at them like a third world developing nation. Putin has spent the last 20 years trying to rebuild the Russian brand in a way that was reminiscent of that of the Soviet Union. And part of that is reaching out let's use a sea metaphor, its tentacles as an octopus, reaching its tentacles out to other parts of the world to, one, increase its own influence, and to, two, confound the interests of other parties, in particular the United States and Europeans, even the Chinese to a certain extent. Anywhere that other potential regional or global powers put a block up. And Syria makes a lot of sense because of the historic support between Russia and Iran, the Soviet Union and Iran, Russia and Assad. And it's a nice counterbalance in the global chessboard, or even we can even say the Eurasian chessboard if we want to put the Middle East in Eurasia. If you can, you probably remember this, but I don't know if your audience does, but 120 years ago, this was called the Tournament of Shadows by the Russian Empire. I always thought that was a fantastic name. In Europe and the United States, they called it the Great Game, but it was the Tournament of Shadows for the Russians, and no one is better than lurking in the shadows than Vladimir Putin and trying to reach out influence this way. And Syria is an excellent example of this, trying to weaken regional powers, trying to weaken other global powers, and insidiously extend its own influence.
Russia and Turkey, anything besides Syria? Don't count in the Syria Idlib issue, especially about S-400s, via America-Turkey relations, the effect of Russia-Turkey?
That is a very, very challenging question because Russia's interest in Turkey are well known and historic. Turkey's interests in Russia are along a different path, as an export market, as a tourism market, as a co-partner, if I can use the term in a very broad sense, in introducing stability in certain regions like the Caucasus or Central Asia. Russia has abiding interest in Central Asia. Turkey has abiding interest in Central Asia. The same goes for the Caucasus. The same goes for the Black Sea as a whole. The S-400 issue was, from the Russian perspective, a very interesting way of, again, trying to peel back the bonds of friendship and interdependence that Turkey had with other countries like the United States. It's basically the same playbook that Russia is using everywhere in the world. They're just identifying those type of things that will most easily and hopefully most irreversibly pull interests in their direction and away from a country like the United States.
I have to ask this at the end, but I can't wait. So
okay.
I'm just going to ask this question. How about Russia after Putin? If there's going to be after Putin, of course. Definitely, I don't think it's going to be Medvedev, but what's your projection about Russia after Putin, whenever it is going to be?
Well, I jokingly told my class this past weekend that I think Putin's now putting efforts into all into it and he can rule indefinitely, because aside from that, Russian politics it's a huge question for the future. Putin has made no obvious successor. I agree with you. I don't think it will be Medvedev, but there aren't any real young and noteworthy up-and-comers, or at least any that have attracted foreign attention, either from the media, from politics, from the scholarly point of view. But obviously, the way that the system has been governed for the past 2 decades, the way that Putin has altered the system, there has to be someone who has, my guess would be that he would probably step down. He wouldn't serve in office until he died, but he would step down after having groomed someone to succeed him, very much like Nazarbayev has done in Kazakhstan as well. Nazarbayev has stepped down as president of Kazakhstan, but he's maintained control of a variety of other administrative functions. So he's essentially the puppet master. Putin is probably going to take a similar approach. He just needs to find the appropriate puppet. And Medvedev has too long of a history with him to be that person.
Okay. When do you think it's going to be the moving from being master to puppet master? So when do you think that process is going to happen? In how many?
I would guess in the next decade. I would say there's probably at least another decade. He still has a couple of years left of his official term, but I can imagine him trying to alter that again, as he's done previously. I would not expect that he would willingly give up power before 2030.
Sounds good. We won't be able to see most probably, but he's good. Okay, let's come to the Russia, Armenia, Azerbaijan.
Honestly, let's talk about
especially about the Nagorno-Karabakh and the conflicted and disputed issues.
Well, Russia doesn't play that big of a role, honestly, with Armenia and Azerbaijan. In fact, the bigger dynamic in that instance is with Iran and the United States, if we're looking at the Caucasus as a whole. Russia's almost sole interest there is, again, keeping these weak states that are dependent upon Russia for certain things, particularly support in the extraction of natural resources and transport of natural resources. But a more interesting dynamic, at least from my perspective as someone who studies this, is the Iran, Azerbaijan, Armenia, Georgia, U.S. angle. And if you don't mind me talking about that for a couple of minutes, I would love to just jump in there. All right, thanks. So the issue we have here is, of of course, with Nagorno-Karabakh as a protected enclave, and it's a decades-old conflict between Armenia and Azerbaijan, there's very little mutual love or mutual respect between these two countries. But interestingly, of Iran for internal development aspects, for export markets, for the limited production capabilities that they have in each of their countries. And this is a very interesting contrast because of their northern neighbor, Georgia, that has developed very, very close relations with the United States and has a more direct conflict with Russia. As your audience all probably knows, that because of the Russian invasion of Abkhazia, there's an occupying army in the northern part of Georgia right now that is protecting the interests of Abkhazians and Ingusetians and Ossetians that live within Georgia proper. So Georgia has a certain level of deference to Russia. But aside from that, most of the focus of the development and the support within Georgia has been U.S. oriented, and to a certain extent, European oriented, but having U.S. as a guarantor state of Georgia's freedom and independence and support for joining an organization like NATO has set up a really interesting dichotomy in the Caucasus as well. A good example of this, it was in January when the United States targeted for assassination Qasem Soleimani, the head of the Revolutionary Guard in Iran. Both Armenia and Azerbaijan sent their condolences to the government of Iran, and they said they did not support this action going against Soleimani. They said the United States was in the wrong, and they said that Iran had suffered irreparably because of this illegal action. And this was very interesting that Armenia and Azerbaijan would actually agree to something. But it's a very good sign of how they're seeking the patronage of Iran at this very interesting time, especially when Iran is receiving very harsh sanctions from the United States and other additional sanctions from Europe, that they're looking to Iran to support them. And Georgia, on the other hand, was all for it. They supported the U.S. action 100%. They say it was a good thing because the Revolutionary Guard and Soleimani in particular had been creating problems and conflicts all around the world, so it was a good thing he was eliminated. And nowhere in any of this do we hear a thing about Russia. Only when it comes to, hey, let's move some oil, let's move some natural gas. That's about the limit of their interests and the active participation that Russia has had in the Caucasus in recent months.
Okay. Now, question. Commonwealth of Independent States, we all remember 1991.
Yep.
Do you think it had worked, and do you think it had served its purposes?
One, it did not work. When the Soviet Union collapsed...
What I mean is, did it work means it continued till today. I'm not asking about that. Do you think it worked its purpose to keep at least the other countries' strength, under the wheels of Russia until it transformed its power to a certain level?
I do not think it did. When the Soviet Union collapsed, we had 15 new independent countries. The three Baltic states, Lithuania, Latvia, and Estonia, immediately did a 180 about face and looked west, and there was no stopping them. They never joined. So right there, the Commonwealth of Independent States was incomplete when it was birthed in 1992, 91, 92 period there. Several of the other Central Asian states did not join as well. So just at its greatest number, the actual membership was much less than that of the former Soviet Union in terms of joining it. And the CIS itself had only ever been basically established as a framework, and the idea of which is that these countries would come together and build upon that framework. And that never happened. It never happened. the 5 Central Asian republics were being catered to by countries within the European Union, by China after some time, by Turkey, by India. And so their interests were being drawn outside of maintaining this type of relationship with other former republics of the Soviet Union. The only real core of it was the dynamic between Belarus, countries that were actively interested in engaging within the framework of the CIS. So over 20 years, it's been a complete and utter failure. It didn't serve its purpose. It didn't serve any purpose. Although it still technically exists, it's really never done anything to help maintain the type of camaraderie or the type of inclusiveness that was originally intended when it was founded 20 or actually almost 30 years ago now. What we have instead is we have competitions from different regional organizations, newer regional bodies that have been set up. The two biggest and most recognizable ones are the Shanghai Cooperation Organization and the Eurasian Economic Community, the or Eurasian Economic Union, the EAEU, and the SCO. Now, there have also been a host of other smaller regional organizations that have pooled the interests of these former Soviet states. There is a nascent security organization with Georgia, Ukraine, Armenia, Azerbaijan, Moldova. There's the Black Sea Area Parliamentary Assembly. Turkey's part of it as well. There's different Central Asian organizations. So what we've seen over the past 30 years is that different types of regional organizations serving either specific purposes or specific audiences have supplanted what the CIS was supposed to be doing. The CIS was supposed to be a big, comprehensive organization to keep all 15 former Soviet republics working together and communicating together, and that never happened. So what we have now is a host of other regional organizations. Now, do I have time to talk a little bit about this, or?
Go ahead.
All right, very good. So the EAEU was, of course, formally announced several years ago, 3 or 4 years ago. I forget the exact date, honestly. One of the first things they did is any member state could get an EAEU passport, which is essentially meaningless because no country had caught up with these passport regimes. What the purpose of the EAEU on its surface is to be a competing economic bloc to the European Union and maybe to be somewhat competitive to the Shanghai Cooperation Organization. But the interesting thing about the EAEU is that a number of the members also have membership in Shanghai as well. So, for example, Russia is a member of Shanghai, China is a member of the EAEU, Kazakhstan's a member of both, Turkmenistan as well. There's a list of overlapping, I think, 7 or 8 countries that are members of both organizations. And when you have this type of competition for resources, for interest, for attention, it stunts the growth of these organizations. And honestly, what we've seen since the EAEU was announced, even with the development of Shanghai, since the Shanghai Five back in the day and its formalization of the Shanghai Cooperation Organization, is that we have 2 players in Eurasia, Russia and China, that are trying to help mold or trying to lead the molding of that supercontinent in the image that they want, in a way that supports them in their interests to build, to develop, to grow more powerful vis-a-vis other countries, either in the region or across the globe. I'll do a good example, which is part of China's Belt and Road Initiative. Now, Shanghai Cooperation Organization helps support China's interest in the Belt and Road Initiative. As your audience probably knows, it's a multi-trillion-dollar program where China invests money all around the world to develop infrastructure projects, ports, roads, pipelines, freight lines, highways, and the like. So China, when it initially had membership within the SCO, what it has done is also founded bilateral agreements with each of the members as well, giving them direct access to these countries. So China and Pakistan, China and Kazakhstan, China and whatever stan or whatever country you want to say has joined it. Okay. So when the SCO was being developed, it was also being undermined by its original founder, that being China. So we have the China-Pakistan Economic Corridor, which was designed to invest Chinese money and bring Chinese influence into Pakistan and to build a port in the southwestern part of the country, in Baluchistan, in Pakistan, travel all the way up, have highways and train lines and pipelines going all the way up through the country to reach the western part of China and having spurs that can go off into Afghanistan. So China, first under the umbrella of the SCO, but later directly with the country, invested billions of dollars in this project, also increasing its influence in Pakistan. Russia, on the other side, had also started a similar game plan, ostensibly within the EAEU for economic development purposes, but more interested in terms of developing its own power and influence. And this is the International North-South Transit Corridor, which is a development cooperation similar to China and Pakistan, but this one is with India, Iran, and Russia. It also gains access to some of the same areas, particularly Afghanistan, and it serves as a competing transit route for energy, for manufactured goods, for freight, for logistics and supply chain and all of that. So we see that an organization like the SCO, which was designed to give China access to these other countries, has helped give China access to these other countries. We see an organization like the EAEU, which was designed to give Russia access to other countries, has also been successful in giving this so dominant within these organizations that the organizations themselves would tend to wither, that they can't grow and they can't develop independently. If you took China out of the SCO would mean nothing. If you took Russia out of the EAEU would mean nothing. And there would be no regional comprehensive organization for Eurasia at all. This is where the European Union succeeds, or has succeeded in the past. Maybe it's not seen as so successful right now, is that Germany is, yes, the most powerful economic engine. France is the most powerful political force behind the foundation and the development of the EU. But other countries also contributed significantly, whether it's the UK, the Benelux countries, even Italy and Spain. We all know that Greece was taking all the money, but sometimes that was good. All right? But we don't see that kind of egalitarian approach or more balanced approach in Eurasia. So CIS was a failure as an overarching framework. The EAEU is stunted in its growth because of the outsized dominance of Russia. The Shanghai Cooperation Organization is also stunted in its growth because of the outsized cooperation, or the outsized domination of China in that organization. So what we see is sort of a revision to early 20th century approaches to what's going on in Asia. Smaller countries find great power patrons to help develop their own personal interests and foreign policy goal, to realize their own foreign policy goals. We see a starting of a splintering in Central Asia between the different countries. We see that, I gave an example of that splintering in the Caucasus as well. And to a certain extent, it's forced foreign powers like the United States, like the European Union, to diversify their approach when they're engaging with Eurasia. For many, Central Asia is a wonderful example of this. For many years, if not decades, the European Union took a back seat because Central Asia was so far away. As long as the oil tap was on and they were getting energy there, they didn't care who it was coming through. But now that Russia's becoming...
Sean. Gelemedin mi Sean? Okey. Dur bir 2 dakika daha bekleyelim. Evet. Arkadaşlar bugün malumunuz 51. gün. Şan çok çok güzel gidiyordu. Benimki de mi kesiliyor bu arada? ...227. dersimizi de yaptık. Çok dolu, güzel geçti, keyifli geçti. Birazdan... Evet, güzel geçti. Yani Şan benim en beğendiğim bu konuyla ilgili çalışan akademisyenlerden biridir. Bakın yaklaşık 40 dakikada sorular da verdiği cevaplar, netlik, kısalık, tak tak tak tak. Yani müthiş bir Rusya şeyi çizdi bize. Etrafındaki böyle çevresiyle birlikte muazzam bir harita çizdi sağ olsun. Tarihine de gitti. Yani Orta Doğu'su, İran'ı, her şeyle benim en beğendiğim bu konuda çalışan Türkiye'deki akademisyenlerden biridir Sean Cox. Geldi.
I just want to point out this is a company phone.
Okay, go ahead.
Okay, where did I get cut off?
You were saying Russia is very good.
Well, no, what I was saying is that Russia is able to take advantage of its influence in the region because of the organization, just like China has, and that while that's detrimental to the development of these organizations like the EAEU and the SCO, what it's actually doing is improving foreign policy. Years, if not decades, the EU just sort of looked at Central Asia, for example, as 5 countries that did exactly the same thing. It didn't matter which stan it was. If it was Kazakhstan, Turkmenistan, Kyrgyzstan is all. It was just the same thing. They had essentially what was a one-size-fits-all policy for those 5 countries in Central Asia. But now, because of the growing influence the continuing and growing influence of Russia, because of China's interest and its new technological capabilities of having direct access to Central Asia, because of India's growing ability to have access to Central Asia, because of ongoing problems in Pakistan and Afghanistan, this is forcing policymakers in Europe to develop more nuanced policies towards Central Asia and recognize that, yes, there are certain things that all these countries have in common, but there are also diverse aspects that need to be addressed on a country-by-country basis. So this conflict or the competition between Russia and China in Central Asia, between Russia and the United States in the Caucasus, between Russia and the United States in Ukraine, is actually forcing organizations like the EU or forcing NATO to be more considerate and more contemplative on how they develop foreign policies towards Russia and towards these other countries.
Sean, thank you so much, my friend.
Mm-hmm.
I was just telling my students before you reconnect with the company phone, as you call. I was telling them, like, in such a short time, in 40 minutes, that's one of the best lectures that we did. Everything about Russia. Intensive Russian politics course.
All right.
So, thank you for everything.
Mm-hmm.
And arkadaşlar, this is just an information for you all. Sean Cox is teaching in our Global Affairs program in Bahçeşehir University's International Relations programs. So whoever would like to do any kind of thesis or any